Today we have Pastor Dave Swaim, the senior pastor of the Highrock Network, bringing us today's sermon. Dave is my pastor and my mentor. He lives in Bedford with his wife Michelle, and they have 11 children who are adopted from all over the world. Dave loves riding his motorcycle, exercising, and reading. Let's hear what God has led him to say as we reflect and respond to the message.
Good morning, friends. You probably know that Highrock is in a sermon series about prayers that we can use when we just have no words to describe what we're feeling or need. God's the right one to talk to in those moments, but sometimes we don't know how to begin. So today, I'd like to introduce you to a prayer that's been transformational for millions of people, including me. It's called the Serenity Prayer, and it begins like this. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Many of you are familiar with at least part of this prayer because it's emblazoned on coffee mugs and t-shirts and tattoos. Unfortunately, misspelling accept on your tattoo is one of those things you cannot change. Anyway, this prayer has become so popular that there are a million parodies of it as well. But there's a lot more to this prayer than most people realize, both in terms of the depth of the first few lines and because this prayer is actually much longer than just those first few lines. Some of you may wonder why I'm preaching about a prayer that isn't from the Bible, but we're going to see that most of it comes straight from the scriptures. No one knows who first wrote this prayer because it wasn't written by any single person. Its roots go back to the desert monasteries in the year 500, and it keeps showing up in new forms throughout Christian history. The most famous version is that prayed by theologian Reinhold Niebuhr in 1934. So many people resonated with it that it was published in newspapers all over the globe. Bill W., the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, recognized that it contained all of the keys needed to release people from addiction. So ever since, it's been the official prayer of that movement and has blessed millions of people that way. I've found that each line of this prayer is an invitation to a different conversation with God. Today, I simply want to help you start each of those conversations and then let you take it from there over the next few weeks. Most of my sermons are the product of a lot of study, but this one is the product of my own experience praying this prayer over and over and over again because I needed it. Given all the stress from COVID and quarantine and America's racial reckoning and uncertainty about schools and politics and the economy, I was feeling frazzled, like a lot of us are. At the same time, I've been working harder than ever. I'm a parent to a lot of kids who are home 24 hours a day, and the amount of effort required to move Highrock online so quickly while simultaneously responding to more people in need than ever has been overwhelming. At the same time, everyone around me is also a bit frazzled. So our shared stress was spilling out on each other in ways that only made things harder. All that added up, I wasn't sleeping well. I was working all the time and getting angry a lot more easily. Serenity? Not so much. And that's where this prayer came in. So let's dive in. The first word we tend to rush right over, but it's the most important word in the entire prayer. God. I always pause here because this prayer is cliche if it's reduced to a self-help mantra, but it can be life-changing when it's a conversation with the living God. Too often, I don't hear God speaking throughout the day because I'm not listening. I forget God's there. I feel alone simply because I'm ignoring the one who's always with me. In Psalm 46, as the whole world seemed to be falling apart, God instructed, "Be still and know that I am God." Reconnecting with God is essential to finding the serenity, courage, or wisdom we long for. So I'm going to give you 10 seconds to do that right now. Acknowledge that God is with you. and believe that God wants to speak to you during this service. Prepare your heart to listen. Okay, the conversation has begun. But what do I say next? Well, how about this? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. What is serenity? It's a peace that has penetrated your soul and remains in you even when your circumstances are chaotic. It's the opposite of stress, anxiety, and trying to control everything. Honestly, it's the opposite of what I was feeling this past month. All of us long for serenity these days. But how do we find it? The first step is to accept the things I cannot change. The famous 5 stages of grief, which include anger, denial, bargaining, and depression, are steps along the pathway to acceptance, which is the only way to peace. Accepting things does not mean I think they're acceptable. They may be horrible, but despite how much I may rage or cry or complain, I cannot change them. Continually trying to will only result in my increasing bitterness or depression. That may be one reason we see both on the rise in our society, because we refuse to acknowledge there are things we can't change. Building on a model first suggested by Stephen Covey, we can divide all the things that bother us into 3 circles. The largest includes all the things that I care about. For me, that includes politics, our economy, climate change, and racial injustice. It includes personal things like my kids, my marriage, my health, my job, my finances, my friendships. It includes a lot of regrets from the past and worries about the future. I care about all of those things and more, and any of them can get me upset. But I can't do anything about many of them. For example, I wish I could undo some of my past mistakes, ways I sinned or hurt people, opportunities I missed. But no matter how much I dwell on it or beat myself up, I can't change the past. Other things I can do something about. I can't make my wife or kids be happy, but I can be kind to them. I can't fix climate change, but I could drive less, recycle, turn up the air conditioning a degree or 2. I can't end racism, but I can vote for policies and people who are fighting systemic racism and speak up when I hear racist comments. These things fall into my circle of influence. I can affect them, but not control them. All I can really control is my behavior and attitudes. In addition to peace, one of the fruit God's Spirit gives us is self-control. The ability to control other people, not a gift God gives us. I can't control how other people will treat me, but I can control the way I'll treat them, which may influence the way they treat me. I can't control what comes up on Twitter, but I can control how often I look at it or how I respond. I can't control the political process, but I can vote and donate to good candidates. 3 circles: my circle of concern, my circle of influence, and my circle of control. The point is that God hasn't given me control over many of the things that I care about. For example, I care about my children, but I can't control any of their decisions or those of any other adult. If I refuse to accept that, I'll only infuriate all of us. Accept is a verb. It's something I have to do. It's something I have to keep doing because I keep thinking I could do a much better job if I had God's power to control things. Or maybe not, because not only do I not have God's power, I don't have God's insight either. I can't know the long-term implications of the changes I'd make, how each thread participates in a story that may be larger than my entire lifetime. The movie Bruce Almighty is a comedy about a guy who thought that he could do a better job managing the world than God does. But when given a small portion of God's power for one day, he discovered just how difficult that is. Everything is in God's circle of control. And yet, for some strange reason, God has chosen not to fix some of those things that I want to. Or at least not yet. This includes many things that I know God doesn't like. I wonder what God knows that I don't. Instead of perpetually trying to be God by controlling things we can't, we need to cast all of our anxieties, all those things in our circle of concern, on God. Trust God to worry about them because only God can control them, and he cares for us. That's why the Serenity Prayer asks for the wisdom to know the difference between what I cannot change and what I can. And it's the first step towards peace. This part of the prayer comes straight from James chapter 1:5, where we read, "If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all, and it will be given to you." Let's do that right now. Is there something in your life that you really care about, but you can't control? Something you keep trying to manipulate or fight, but you just need to accept and trust God with? Ask God that right now, and then listen. Now, some of these things will be global things, others will be personal. Listen for both. I'm going to give you about 20 seconds of silence just to start that conversation. Ask God, what am I trying to control that I need to give you instead? Some of you noticed that I missed a line of this prayer. Gaining God's wisdom about what I can and can't change is not only so that I can have more peace, it's also so that I can hear what God is calling me to do. Too often we keep stewing about things that we can't change as a way to avoid dealing with the things God has called us to change. It's how we duck responsibility. Because many of us are afraid to make these changes. I'm afraid to reconcile that relationship, confess that sin, let go of that addiction that I used to comfort myself. Take that risk or make the sacrifice that God is calling me to. It's easier to complain about things that I cannot change than to do the work of changing the things that I can. So what are you called to change? Stereotypically, liberals are eager to change things outside themselves. The sinful systems in the world, like racism, sexism, income inequality, justice reform, immigration, and more, all of which are important. Conservatives, on the other hand, prefer to change things inside themselves, including their attitudes, motives, behavior, choices, and spiritual life. They want to become more kind, pray more, deal with their temper, their addiction, or foul language. Christians, God calls us to address the evil in us and the evil around us. Neither is adequate on its own. It'll require sacrifices and risk, which is why we ask God, grant me the courage to change the things that I can. Will God actually do that? Yes! Timothy testifies, the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline. Now, that doesn't mean that we won't be afraid. Addressing systemic injustice or personal sin is scary. Courage simply means that we don't let that fear keep us stuck. Courage is just fear that has said its prayers. Whether we're talking about personal sins or systemic racism, we already agreed that I can't change the past, but I can make restitution and resolve not to let it continue. I need the humility to accept what I can't change and the courage to change the things I can. As you consider your marriage, parenting, future, or the problems in our society, pray, God, give me the serenity to accept what I cannot change, the courage to change what I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Okay, time for another check-in with God. Let's ask what God may be calling us to change. Now, listen for God to speak about something internal and something external. This is going to be quick, but I want you to start a conversation with God that you can pick up this coming week. Most people stop this prayer there because that's as much of the prayer as can fit on a bumper sticker. But actually, my favorite parts are in the second half of the prayer. Living one day at a time, enjoying each moment, accepting hardships as the pathway to peace, taking, as Jesus did, this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. Living one day at a time. Alcoholics Anonymous has clung to this prayer because asking somebody to give up alcohol for life can just seem impossible. So they don't ask you to make that big a commitment. Just do it today. And tomorrow, just do it that day. One day at a time. This can be helpful for all of us. I don't know if I can commit to not losing my temper for the rest of my life. So I'll concentrate on not doing it today. I don't know if I can be patient with my family for the rest of my life. But I can commit to doing it today. I don't know if I can kick my porn habit forever, but I'm definitely going to win that battle today. One day at a time. As Jesus said, don't worry about tomorrow. Each day has enough trouble of its own. For me, the second line has been even more impactful. I tend to live in the future, always dreaming or worrying about what might happen with my kids or my finances, our church or our country. And when I'm not doing that, I tend to jump back into the past, replaying old mistakes that I can't do anything about now. But this prayer invites me to be present right here. So every time I pray it, I stop to appreciate the blessings around me that I miss when I'm stuck in another time zone. Recently, I was hiking with my family. Now, I don't love hiking. It's not what I would choose. But my wife likes it, and during COVID, there aren't a lot of other options. So we went hiking. I planned to keep my bad attitude to myself, but as I walked along quietly, my mind turned to the same old anxieties and regrets, and my annoyance that hiking is the best we can do. But in the midst of that, I prayed this prayer, and when I got to the line, enjoying each moment, I paused. I remembered, this is the day that the Lord has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. So I started paying attention. I noticed that the woods around us were beautiful, and the weather was ideal. It had rained the night before, so everything sparkled and smelled wonderful. I thank God that my body is healthy enough to hike, and that my family was having fun together. Actually, this is kind of a great moment. I started thanking God for this delightful hike. Slowly, I was overtaken by, joy, contentment, serenity. That's it. Friends, I don't just want to survive my days. I want to savor them. So let's stop again quickly and enjoy this moment. What can you give God thanks for right now? Again, you can continue that conversation later. Now, this could sound like we're trying to live with rose-colored glasses, but the prayer's next line recognizes that not everything is enjoyable, and it challenges us to look for God even in our darker moments. Paul did this and discovered what we never expect when disaster strikes, that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him. Do I believe that the same God that I can meet in a glowing sunset can also be found in a frustrating setback? The God who's with me during Bible study is also present during my bankruptcy? God can find ways to bless me through both. So we pray, accepting hardships as the pathway to peace. Taking, as Jesus did, this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it. Our world is broken, sinful, polluted, and unfair. So God may not like what's happening to you or others any more than you do, but God won't waste it either. God can miraculously use what was intended to be a curse to bless us instead. But that doesn't justify the evil in the world. So accepting this broken world is only possible if I'm trusting that you will make all things right. One day, God promises to bring complete justice, complete love, complete beauty, and complete peace. Not yet, but one day. God guarantees that evil will not win. Death will not win. Injustice will not go unnoticed. One day, God will make it right if I surrender to His will. Notice the word surrender. That's a fighting word because most of us spend our lives in a battle with God, warring over control. I want God to do things my way and on my schedule. Actually, forget that. I want to be God and do it myself. But the pathway to peace, Jesus promises, is to embrace God's timing and process rather than demanding that God embrace mine. Do you see how different this is in the kind of peace that the world offers? The world says that you'll finally find peace when your circumstances are finally fixed. When people treat you the way you deserve, your party is in power, and you have enough money to buy whatever must-have thing they're selling at the moment. But that doesn't actually work. We all know lots of people who have an abundance of admiration, health, cash, and cool stuff, but are still unsettled and dissatisfied. Many of us are those people. So we know that these things don't deliver the peace that we were promised. So Jesus offers us peace in a way that's different from the world's way. The secret to serenity is accepting the world's faults, enjoying God's gifts, embracing my part in God's plan to save, and trusting that God will make all things right one day. Serenity is the fruit of surrendering to God. Are you wrestling with God over something? You want the world or your life to be one way, but God isn't obeying your commands? Is there a place that you're fighting too hard for control instead of being content to trust God? Let's pause and ask God that very question. Finally, what will happen if I really live this prayer? I'll be ecstatically happy for the rest of my life. No, that's not real. That's what our world sometimes promises, and some churches do too. You can have your best life now. But I end up feeling cheated and embittered when I don't experience that. None of us actually experiences that. Not even really rich people or people with great marriages or the most holy pastors. It's a lie. And this is so important because recent sociological studies demonstrate that most of our disappointment in life doesn't come from our situations, but from our expectations. Secretly, most of us expect that we should be ecstatically happy every second of our lives, or at least most of them, and we wonder why we're not. We wonder, did I fail? Is my spouse the problem? Or my parents? Or kids? Or my unreasonable boss? Or maybe did God let me down? We wonder whom to blame. Many people feel despondent because their lives don't seem nearly as great as everybody they see on TV or social media. These things have distorted our expectations of reality. The Serenity Prayer is more honest. That I may be reasonably happy in this life. Now, most people chuckle when they hear this line for the first time because they're so accustomed to the excessive promises of the world. But in this sinful world, reasonably happy is the best we can hope for. But reasonably happy, like I was hiking, it's pretty good. Despite what you see in Christmas cards and Facebook posts, that's a lot better than most people experience these days. And when I accept that reasonably happy is the goal, then I can step back and realize I am reasonably happy. So instead of worrying that I might be missing out or blowing it or being cheated somehow, I can enjoy how blessed I am to be experiencing exactly what this prayer teaches me to hope for. Thanks, God. I won't always have to settle for reasonably happy. There's something in me that longs for ecstatic joy. God put that in me because ecstatic joy is coming. Revelation 21 describes what eternity will be like for those who trust Jesus. God himself will be with them and will be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. He who was seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. It sure isn't the world we live in today, but it's the world God promises, and regularly reminding myself that it's coming, not so long from now, keeps me from trying to build a pretend heaven here on earth by accumulating enough achievements, admiration, or possessions. Those things are never going to be enough. But I don't need all those things because soon I will be supremely happy with God forever. I can accept this broken world only because I know it won't last very long, and God will make all things right. Well, that's it. The Serenity Prayer. I've probably prayed this 20 times a day in the last 2 weeks because I just wasn't experiencing the peace that Jesus promises me. This prayer has been instrumental in helping me reconnect with God, rediscover serenity in the midst of the storms that we're all facing, and hear again what God may be calling me to change. Reading this prayer for the first time was interesting, but that's about all. Memorizing it and praying it regularly has been transformational. So I want to invite you to memorize this prayer and pray it multiple times throughout the day. Pray it not as a mantra, but as a way of dialoguing with God. Friends, these have been challenging days, and we have more challenges ahead. But Jesus promises that we can have peace in the midst of it. Serenity. That's my prayer for all of us. Amen.